Hello, welcome to Back to School Basics, Managing Classes and Reviewing Student Progress with NUITEQ Snowflake. And my name is Jack Reed. I am Vice President of NUITEQ. I'm Vice President of Customer Experience. And with me is Danielle Macklin, and she will be leading the webinar series this evening. I want to welcome you to the series. I will probably be posting a poll during the series, so if you would look before you exit and make sure that you answer the poll. And during the webinar, if you have any questions, please put the questions in the question field, and I will relay them to Danielle as we go through. So thank you so much. Danielle, take it away.
Great, thank you. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. On our 7 p.m. series, we're going to be doing more in-depth Snowflake pedagogy and understanding how you can incorporate it in your class if you're doing in-person instruction or remote or a hybrid. And today's session is going to be focused on checking out some of the new features in the managed classes and reviewing student progress. So I'm going to assume that many of us already have a little bit of background in using Snowflake.live. So what I'll be showing will probably be a little bit of a refresher, but there's also going to be a lot of new information as well. So if at any point you have a question, just relay that to Jack and he will send that question my way. So I'm going to bring us over to our Snowflake screen, and I'm going to start at the class menu option. So from this dashboard, under Manage Students, we have a few new updates. So you can see that I've already created a few different demo classes, and there are a few different ways that you can create your class. So you can create standard through the first option of creating new class, where I can then add in my class name. So we're going to call this our September. And then I can add in my students importing from ClassLink, importing from Google Classroom, from a list of emails, or individually. So if I do individually, I can do either by a student email, or I can just start with a student name. So that I want to add Jack to my class. If I select the add option, I can then add that student email, or I can select that student has no email. When I select student has no email, and then add that student, Snowflake will give me a auto-generated username and password. So if you are choosing to do this with your students, I do recommend that you copy and paste into a document the student username and password, or to take a screenshot of this section so that you do have access to that username and password. This is how the student would then log into their Snowflake account. So this is creating a class individually. So I have just my one student. I can see that student's username. And if that student had a little green check mark right here next to their name, that would show me that student has already logged into Snowflake.live at some point. The other option, and I'm just going to delete this class for now, I can create a class by importing a CSV of emails. So with the CSV import, the only part that you would need is the student username, or excuse me, the student email. Everything else is going to be filtered off. So no first names, last names, none of that will appear. It'll only look for an actual email address. So there's my CSV file. As I'm importing that CSV of emails, I can now see all of my students. And since this is a CSV that I have used before, I can see that all of those students have already logged into Snowflake.live. So again, I'm going to retitle my class. And I have my green check marks so that I can see all of my students. And then now I have that class created. So there we can see my September class. I also can import from ClassLink. Now, unfortunately, I do not have a ClassLink account, so I can't demo that, but it does import in the similar way to importing from Google Classroom. So if I import from Google Classroom, it is going to pull in all of my Google Classroom classes. In this case, I just have the one, my Snowflake demo class. And when I import from there, we can see I've already created this class. We can see I have my students from that class already added to my roster. So in adding all of my students and setting up my classes, as a teacher, I now can send them lesson activities. I can send lesson activities that I've created, and I can also send lesson activities from the community. So that's what I'll do. I'll send one from the community. So from the Snowflake community, I can access any of the lessons featured on the main dashboard. I can also search for particular lesson activities or search by standards and send those lesson activities to my students. So in this case, let's say I was doing a lesson activity on fractions. And I can see all of the lesson activities related to fractions. And we'll pick this one to send to my students. So from the community, I select the more options. I select send to students. And then I have the lesson activity. I can select which group of students, which class I would like to send it to. So I will send this to my September class. And this particular lesson activity type is an assessment lesson activity. So I can send this as a gradable assessment. What that means is when my students complete the lesson activity, I will receive a score, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we go through review progress. There we go. All right, so as I was saying, with this lesson activity type, this particular lesson activity is a gradable assessment. So I can enable that feature. Now I'll be able to receive data from my students on how they performed on that lesson activity. I also can choose to send this lesson activity to select students, or I can select all of the students if I wanted to send it to the whole class. This feature is really great if you're doing anything with differentiation. Maybe you have students who have particular accommodations or modifications that you wanted to include on a lesson activity. I can make those edits and send only to those select students as needed. I can also select my due date. So we'll have this due tomorrow, which I can't believe it's already October. And then another new option we have is being able to notify students via email. So with this lesson activity type, once I send the assignment, my students will receive an email notification that I have sent to them a lesson activity. So go ahead and send the assignment, and now that assignment has been sent to my students. Once I'm happy with assignments I've sent, once I have all of my classes created, I can then review the progress of my students. So we can see all of my classes that I've created, Snowflake test class, my distance learning, etc. I can see this most recent assignment that I sent. Now, obviously, my students haven't completed this because I'm technically the students and I just sent that assignment. But I do have examples of assignments that have been sent. So we'll start with this mixing colors one. So with this particular assessment, this was a gradable assessment. So there are 8 lesson activity templates that are gradable assessments. I had a due date for that lesson activity. And now that my students have completed, I'm able to see the data from that lesson activity type. I can see the average class score, and I can see the average amount of time that my students spent completing that lesson activity. I also can see my individual student results. I can see that they opened the lesson activity. I can see the score, and I can also see how much time each individual student spent completing the lesson activity type. I think this is a really important feature because it gives you a chance to see which students are being very thoughtful about their answers and taking the time to do a lesson activity versus students who maybe are rushing through something. And as a teacher, it also gives you a little bit of data as far as what am I as a teacher, if I'm seeing all of my students are taking a really long time on something that I thought would be over in just a couple minutes, what do I need to go back and reevaluate or reteach? So it's good to have that little extra piece of information. So with that, I can also see for my students, I'll select a student that answers some incorrectly. I can look at the individual lesson activity questions. So I can see this student answered 7 out of 9 correct. Their score percentage was 78. And then the questions themselves, see which ones my students answered correctly. And then I can see the questions that my students answered incorrectly. My student will also see this on their dashboard. So as soon as they complete a gradable assessment, they have access to their information on how they scored. They have access to those questions, and then they'll also have feedback. So feedback is one of the features that we have changed with our most recent update, and I love some of the new feedback options that we have. So we have the ability to give feedback that is just written. I have an example, I think, with this student. I don't know if that was recorded, excuse me. So I have my written feedback, so maybe reminding them of what to do or something that they need to practice more of. I also have the ability to add audio recorded feedback. So I can add up to 60 seconds of audio for my student. It looks like you had some challenges with this lesson. Let's set up a time to review together. And then I also have the option, my new favorite thing, is the ability to add video feedback, which I think I did right here. So with our video feedback, you can add up to 60 seconds of recorded video. I think this is a really great feature for making that personal connection with students, especially since so many students are in a remote learning environment now, or maybe you're doing a hybrid model, or even if you're doing in-class, in-person instruction, this is just a really good way to connect with the kids and make it feel more personal so that they then become more engaged in the learning, that building relationships that you need with students.
Danielle?
Yes.
I have a question that's come in that asks, how will the student know that they have feedback available?
That's a great question. So that will be notified to a student under the notification tab up here. So on a student dashboard, and give me just a second, I will log out of my teacher account and I will pull up a student account. So I'm going to use single sign-on because it's a lot easier. So let me pull up my Snowflake student account.
I have a follow-up question as you're doing that said, would they receive an email notification?
If they have feedback, I believe that any changes to the lesson activity that are done on feedback or if it's been assigned, if that option is enabled, that should also be sent via email. So for my student now, I've logged into an account where I already answered the notification, but this little bell at the top will have a tiny little yellow dot next to it, and that will alert my student that they have a new notification. And with that notification, we can see any messages. So this is, messages would be just general alerts or messages that I sent out to my students from the managed classes. My students can also see any notification if they've been added to a group or if they've been made members of a group. And then the comments is where they would see the feedback from a lesson activity. So we can see there is my lesson activity. If I open that lesson activity assessment, the first thing I'll see is the feedback from my student or from my teacher. Great job, but make sure that you watch the entire video before completing the lesson activity. And then I can, as a student, I can see my answers to the lesson activity itself. So that's from the student perspective. As a student, since I'm here, we can see under my assignments, all of the assignments that had been sent to the student. So it would be assessments that they've been sent back to or from their teacher. It would also include lists that have been sent from their teacher, and then any practice assignments. So here as a student, all of the assessments I still have to do. So there was my most recent one. I can see that I have 1 day left to complete it. versus the ones over here that have expired, so I missed my due date. Some of my lesson activities might not have a due date, so this one doesn't have a due date. I can complete that at any time. I can also see any of the lists that my teacher has sent to me, and then any other additional assignments. So these would be gradable or practice. And then at the bottom, I can see the assessments I've received a grade on. So that notification we saw over here, that assessment, I can see again my feedback from the teacher, and then my questions and answers, as well as my total score at the top. So that's the view from the student dashboard. Another new feature since I'm here that we've changed with our students is students can now create lesson activities. So say I wanted to create a bugs lesson. And I can, as a student, I can then share that lesson activity with a group that my teacher has added me to. So from a teacher perspective, I can create groups for differentiation, or I can create groups for different sections. I taught middle school social studies, so I had 3 sections of 6th graders, 3 sections of 8th graders. I could create groups for each section of those students. And then my students would be able to create lesson activities as a way to demonstrate their understanding and mastery of the content or the concepts, and then share that lesson activity into a group. And then as the admin of the group, I would be able to approve those lesson activities so that other students could then play them as review as well. So I think that's a really great feature that students can now share directly to a group and nowhere else. So that is how students would receive the notification that their teacher provided feedback. I'm going to go back to my teacher account. And I'm really happy that we have sign-on with different single sign-on capabilities like Google and ClassLink and Clever and Microsoft. I am really bad at remembering passwords, so being able to simply link it with my Google account has made my life a lot easier. So as that's loading. So if I go back to my review progress, we saw the different examples of feedback that I can provide. Now, as a teacher, I can provide one of the 3 different types of feedback, or I can do all the different types of feedback. So I can do written feedback, and I can include audio for my students, and I can also record a video for my students. And we have up to 60 seconds for audio and for the voice feedback. So it really gives you an opportunity to be very comprehensive and include a lot of information and feedback for your students. So once I've sent an assignment, once I've reviewed some of the data, another feature that I have is the ability to export those results. So when I select export results, it is going to download as a CSV file. And I pushed one over to my Google Drive. So we can see from that CSV file, if I were to open this with Google Sheets, I would have my student name, that student's email, the title of the assignment, the grade the student received. So this would be really great if I wanted to just import that data into my grade book. So all of that information is easy to access. And then I can see, based off of that percent, how many questions did they answer correctly versus incorrectly out of the total number of questions. And then that my student had completed that activity, and if I added any additional feedback. So comments would be the written feedback that I may have provided for my student. So that is how we can access some of that data for our students. So I know kind of a lot of new stuff, a lot of review as well for some of our Snowflake users who've been with us from the beginning. At this point, I'd like to open up for any questions or any feedback from some of our webinar participants. And now that I can switch over and see names, I see some familiar faces, so I'm really happy to see some of the same names from last year. So thank you for coming back for round 2 of our webinars.
So I would like to also ask people that while we're waiting for the questions to come in, if you could please go to the polls and answer the poll questions, we would appreciate it. And thank you, Diane. While you're answering the polls, I'm going to give you a couple of wait minutes also for the posting questions. I would like to, while we're doing this, remind people that we are having a number of series of the webinar, so it's a little different than last year. Danielle has to talk all day long on Wednesdays. And so we will be having at 1 o'clock Eastern time and 5:30 Eastern time, we will be having a similar series as we did last year of the how-to. How do you build a lesson activity? What are the different lesson activities? And how do you use the software? And so that will be again every Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern time, which would be 7 p.m. Central European time. And then again at 5:30 Eastern time, which would be 4:30 Central time in the US. We're trying to be able to hit as many time zones as we can. So that will be the same topic every Wednesday at 1 and 5:30, and that will be the how-to. And then at 7 o'clock, we will be going more into depth of how to do things like she was showing tonight. We'll talk more about pedagogical issues and how you use technology to transform teaching in your classroom. So if you want to go back over to nuitec.com/webinar and register, you should be able to register for quite a few of them at this point. So Danielle, it looks like you did a great job. We don't have any other questions coming in. So I am going to say thank you. Thank you for a great presentation, and thank you to all of you that joined in this evening and came to the presentation and participated with us. I see that not everyone's done the poll, so I'm going to let Danielle go, but I'm going to hang on for a couple of seconds so that people can answer. And thank you all very much, and have a wonderful evening, and hope to see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks again.